No worries. Got it. So budgeting in 5 steps: plan, know where you'll spend your money, develop a budget that includes income to pay for the program, identify those sources of income, identify other approved fundraisers or service projects the unit might need to bring in further income. Perhaps you need to buy a trailer. Perhaps you're saving up for a foreign trip. Perhaps you've got an ambition to go to Philmont or to Seabase, and you want that to come from your budget. In our case, we don't, but that may be your choice. And the most important thing is to get commitment from parents and youth. When you have a written plan, when you have a written budget, and you have a treasurer that has a track record in maintaining and understanding these things, you'll find that parents and youth will align themselves much more quickly. If you don't have a clue how you're going to fund your troop, it's unlikely that you're going to get commitment from parents and youth. So it's not only transparency, it's also credibility and integrity resulting from going through these 5 steps. The next slide is really useful. It's important because it shows the cyclicality, the rhythm of the budget and planning cycle. So it all starts with the plan, right? You start at the top. The budget and planning cycle basically says, how many campouts are we doing? How many scouts are we expecting this year? Because bear in mind, you're going to start with a number of scouts. You may end with a different number. And that's typically something that you do in the summer. We often do this, frankly, we do this at Camp Gorton. We'll get the entire committee and perhaps some other family members together to say, what do we want to do? What are your ambitions? Is it 10 camps, 11 camps? Are you expecting 25 boys and 7 girls? What are we expecting? The fall cycle we enter into in the September, October is basically when we do popcorn sales. And the popcorn sales are a focal area. As you can imagine, when kids have started school and started scouting in earnest, they're very busy. So there's not a lot more that they can do in terms of fundraising. But during the winter, we also assess what the fees and dues we're going to charge, right, to cover the cost of the scouting. And the popcorn sales are, of course, targeted to cover a substantial amount of those fees. We'll go into that detail a little bit later. Towards the winter and in the spring, we do fundraisers. And then, of course, towards the early summer, when the scouting year ends, that's when the budget closes. We typically produce a report to say, how did we do? How much money have we got left, if we have any left at all? Okay, so that's the budget planning cycle. Inside, you'll see that while this is happening, the committee's meeting every month. So therefore, the treasurer is reporting out on essentially what the income, the outgoing expenses are, how much money is available, whether we're on track, off track, what scout accounts are accumulating, what camps are costing, are we spending too much, have we got money left over, right? And essentially making sure that there is a cadence, a monthly report on the income and the expenses, the events, the commitments that are happening during that period. So the large items are, of course, things that the treasurer and the committee need to focus on. The smaller items, of course, the committees and, of course, the regular rhythm of the actual troop meetings, troop camps, courts of honor are actually involved in that cycle. I want to point out, fundraisers can happen at any time, right? They don't have to happen in the winter or the spring, but they have to happen. I mean, the fundraiser is essentially the way that you ensure not only the success of the troop, but the ongoing success. If you're not able, for example, to pay for insurance for your equipment, for your trailer, or in fact to maintain the trailer, you'll need fundraising activities above and beyond the budget cycle in order to make that happen. And of course, there are always those unexpected costs, right? A wheel fell off the trailer. Maybe one of those that horns that you've been blowing this evening fails, and you need to go buy a bunch of those horns in order to make sure that you're heard. So there's an example of an unexpected cost. But the budget cycle and understanding the cyclicality is critical to maintaining the credibility and openness with the troop families and the scouts. Again, if you're not actively participating in the planning, the sales, the collection of fees and dues, if any of these steps is missed, you'll find parents will probably ask questions like, I thought we were having a fundraiser. Didn't we need a fundraiser? Why have we not planned a fundraiser? So it's important to try to get into that rhythm. So an annual troop budget, I'm giving this as an example. It starts with an assumption around how many scouts you have. Maybe it's 10. How many adults you're planning to register? Maybe it's 10. And how many camps or trips you're planning per year. They're probably the most important fundamental assumptions you need to make when you start. Now, in our case, I already mentioned Troop 61 in Corning, we aim to budget so that the total cost of most outings is covered. We don't plan to have the cost covered for things like Bristol Aerial Adventures, or perhaps rafting at Letchworth. If we were to travel as far as Assateague or head into the Adirondacks, we might find that we may need to charge a little, but we aim to make sure that those kind of trips are covered. If we have higher cost trips, so if we organize a Scoutmaster trip to Boston, or essentially a trip to a larger city, or if we're going skiing at Swain, something that will cost 40, 50, or 60 bucks a scout, we would assume that those would incur an additional charge. We incorporate that into our spreadsheet for planning purposes, so most families will know ahead of time what these things will cost. We don't include high adventure like Philmont or Sea Base in our annual budget. We deal with that separately. We assume that a group of scouts that wants to go to Philmont will organize a separate fundraising activity. That doesn't mean that you can't incorporate it, but we choose not to do that. So how do we keep the recurring costs down for scouting compared to other troops, and also compared to other activities, sports activities, for example? Well, I already mentioned we don't like pay as you go. So we concentrate on fundraising, and we only fundraise sufficient for success. We never aim to do too much. We also aim to utilize any prior year surplus to offset the current year's expenses. For example, we might have a couple $100 in unused camper ships carried over from the prior year. We budget for 4, only 2 people actually showed up and asked for camper ships, so we had 2 left over. We'll keep track sufficient to ensure that that money gets carried over from the previous year to the next year. Any surplus that's remaining might be maintained as a modest equipment fund for emergencies, as I already mentioned, trailer bearings, tires, registration, or it can be carried forward to lower the following year expenses. Of course, that's a decision the committee has to make. If you've got, like we did, the COVID year, when we couldn't go camping, we had at least a couple of $1,000 left over from that year. The prior year's popcorn and fundraising activities had actually produced enough cash to cover 11 camps. We didn't camp 11 times, so we had money left over. We chose to use that money for reducing the cost for the following year. But we have one fundamental principle. In that cycle, we aim to spend the funds raised in the year that they're raised or in the year after. I think it's tremendously unfair for a troop to raise money and not spend it on the scouts that actually raised the money. So we don't aim to create a large surplus and have that surplus essentially last for 5 or 10 years. I'm not saying that you can't do that, but I think you have to tag it specifically for something like a trailer or a specific expense. That goes back to that integrity question. You need the families to know that you are spending the money the way that you planned to spend it. Because when you ask those families to go out and raise money, you asked for a specific reason. You don't want to get into a situation where money that's left over doesn't get tagged for the purpose for which it was originally earmarked. So here's an example budget. Our troop actually collects $220 per scout. It's unchanged from the prior year, actually, which is a good thing. We have something called dues of 120. I'll describe what that means. And we, of course, collect 96. I think 96 is the updated number that we connect for each scout to cover national registration. Registration fee, roughly $100. We reduced to 66 per scout for multi-scout families. We don't think it's fair that if you have 3 scouts, they all pay $100. We try to go from 100 to 66 for the second and third scout. That $120 covers general troop and trip costs. So if you come into the troop and you don't fundraise, you don't sell popcorn, your annual fees are $120. Okay? We collect that money in December. between December and January after popcorn credits have been applied. Why? Well, we know that some scouts are going to sell thousands of dollars of popcorn, some are going to sell a few hundred, and some are going to sell none. And in that case, we want to make sure that we know how much popcorn they've sold, since a fraction of that goes towards covering that $120. In fact, it covers both the $120 and the $96 for registration. So the registration fee and the Scout Troop activities, as we call them, dues, can be paid with Scout credits from popcorn sales. It can be paid with Scout credits from a prior year through popcorn sales, or it can be paid as a check. We feel that paying with a check is the least desirable method. If mom and dad are paying and the Scout doesn't see the money, the cash flow through the troop, they think money grows on trees, and they don't understand that the troop is essentially only can only be supported if it's actually raising money through fundraising activities. So we prefer to see popcorn sales and fundraising activities as the main revenue for our troop personally. Again, it's a personal preference. It's a sort of a community standard for us, but it's something we've been doing for 10 years and it's worked very well for us. We always say detailed budget is available for review. Can't emphasize enough that transparency and openness are the key to a successful budget. You can't have it looking like there's funny business going on, or worse, right? Incompetence. It's like I gave them money, but they lost it. Or I don't know where my money is. I don't know what my Scout account balance is. They're unacceptable, right? That's an unacceptable way to run a troop. So fundraising for the troop. We actually say that fundraising for participation on a troop is mandatory. Every family is expected to participate. We don't really think that there are many good reasons why a family can't fundraise. If there are, please let me know. Troops typically raise money through popcorn sales. I already mentioned that we have to raise that $220. If you multiply that by 3, because roughly a third goes to the troop, then that would mean that we would have to sell $660 of popcorn to cover that. Now that covers most but not all costs. I already said that a more expensive camp out may actually result in a per camp cost, but most camp outs will be covered if a Scout sells $660 worth of popcorn in our case. We think that's very doable. It's very reasonable, and we have many of our Scouts that sell double, and some that sell even 3 or 4 times that amount per year. Once the target is met, Scouts benefit on a sliding scale above 660. I'll describe that in a little bit more detail, but we feel that if a Scout goes above and beyond and sells, let's say, twice that amount or 3 times that amount, we don't think it's fair that the troop takes, again, a third. We feel as though the troop should take less than a third on a sliding scale and actually take nothing above a certain level. It should go to the Scout accounts, and then they can use that for buying equipment from the Scout shop, or in fact for paying for Camp Gordon, for example. We also aim to have at least 2 fundraisers. We actually do the rest stop. We haven't done it for a while. We'll be doing it again this year for the first time, which is really exciting. And you can see a little picture down there that shows our rest stop fundraiser. We actually get donated donuts from Dunkin' Donuts, and we don't sell them, but we do offer them to travelers, and they often provide us with donations. We also fundraise through snack stick sales, pizza certificates, and recently we've offered chicken barbecue, and they've been very successful. We also participate in Friends of Scouting to benefit the district. So how does that work? Well, popcorn sales have a huge impact on cost. And, we've been fortunate that some Scouts, as I already mentioned, have sold 2 or 3 times the target. 33% of everything up to $660 goes to the troop. So that $660 will raise the $220 that we require to cover dues and fees in a year. Above $660 and below $900, we do 23%, 10%, with 10% of those additional sales going to the Scout. Above $900, 20% goes to the Scout, 13% comes to the troop. Above $1,200, 30% goes to the Scout, and only 3% goes. You can clearly see how that incentivizes some Scouts to sell extraordinarily high levels of popcorn if they can. If they're talented, if they're the kind of Scout that can walk up to a door and say something like, "I'm headed to Philmont this year. Would you make that happen?" We've actually seen extraordinary. We've seen some Scouts raise $4,000 or $5,000 in a given year. And we understand that we're in the city, so sometimes that helps because there's lots of neighborhoods and lots of generous people in our community. But popcorn sales enable the scout to meet their responsibility. The sale of the about $300 worth of popcorn covers the registration fee. The sale of an additional 360 covers the troop activities and the dues. So that's a total popcorn target of $660. That's where it comes from. I like numbers that divide by 3 easily because of the 33% rules, right? The combined target of 660, we also reduced that, I already mentioned, for multi-scout families. We don't think it's fair that every scout has to raise that 660. So currently 33% of the popcorn sales go to district. I don't know if anybody realizes that if we raise $7,500 worth of popcorn, say, right, maybe you've got, 10 or 12 scouts all selling popcorn. That's roughly $250 per scout going to the district. It's not a lot of money. It's not enough money, in fact, going to the district, and that's why we always support Friends of Scouting. This is very small compared to what scouting actually costs. I think I saw from either G or from you, Carl, or from might have been from Kurt, an estimate that scouting is definitely not a $250 cost for our district. It's probably somewhere in the $300 to $400 range. But it is extremely important that you don't convey the message that if you hit popcorn, you're done. Popcorn is not sufficient unless you have a large number of very talented salespeople selling popcorn. So in addition to the Rest Stop fundraiser already mentioned, we hold fundraisers. Now, for those fundraisers, we split the revenue and the profit before the event by having a discussion at committee. If we're holding a fundraiser, we will decide upfront whether it is to benefit the group, the scout, the district, and in what percentage or fraction we feel that should occur. Split per event is always discussed at the planning stage. You cannot hold a fundraiser and then say, oh, I thought we were giving the money to the scouts. I thought the money was going to the district. That's a disaster. You will not have families turning up to another fundraiser if that happens. Always discuss the planning, always get approval. There's an approval process for a fundraiser, and always make it open and make sure that you get a consensus for how to split the revenue from a fundraiser. Try to gain consensus. It's not always possible, but try to gain consensus and always promote fairness. Committee meetings must always cover finance status. You must always have an update from a treasurer. It's important that you have someone who is fiscally responsible, someone that knows how to use Microsoft Excel or something similar. The treasurer has to come every month prepared to the meetings. I can't see enough that the success of Troop 61 is in no small part the fact that we've had trustworthy and we have had diligent, competent people covering our finance for the last 10 years. So here's an example. The budget for the troop in 1 year was $15,000 to cover the expenses over roughly 10 camps or trips. That assumed something in the range of $6,000 to $7,500 popcorn sales, with around $2,500 coming to the troop. That's 33%. Now you'll notice, budget $15,000, popcorn sales, revenue from that $2,500. Where does the rest of the money come from? Well, of course, it has to come from other fundraising activities, or it has to come from families dipping into their pockets to pay for those expenses. But with 10 girls and 10 boys and 10 adults, these are the things that we include in our master spreadsheet: fundraising income, expenses and income from camps or trips, troop recharter costs, equipment costs, training, subsidies, ceremonies, and uniforms. And you'll notice that we keep a standard ledger, income on one side, expenses on the other, and you hope at the end of the year that the two balance out. In this case, the difference, or the variance as it's called, is only $32. But in a given year, we might find a few $100s of excess or a few $100s of deficit. In the deficit case, you typically find a few families will dip into their pocket and cover it. We've never had an issue where we couldn't cover our deficit. In the case where we have a surplus already mentioned, we typically roll that forward into the next year, and we set aside a little money to pay for trailer costs as they come up. We're going to go through the worksheet in a moment. I also want to point out we often review the year. As you can see here, we'll show the fundraisers, the chicken barbecue, our Canona rest stop, 4th of July, snack fix sales. We sold some pizza certificates and we did some popcorn sales that show the net total, how much went to the troop and how much went to the scouts. And we maintain a spreadsheet meticulously to ensure that the scout credits are accounted for very carefully. There is nothing to compare with the disappointment of a scout that says, I thought I told you I raised some money back in September at the fundraiser, and you go, oh yeah, I didn't put that into the spreadsheet. Sorry, bud, because I can't remember. So you don't want to be in a situation where you don't have openness, accountability, and diligent record keeping for scout credits. You don't want a scout to feel resentful because something was missed. So that's the end of the presentation, Carl. What I'm going to do next, I don't know how much time I have. Jackie, I'm going to just open a couple of spreadsheets. Do I have time for that? Not if I do. Great. So let's go first and show you the draft budget. I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but I want to point out you don't have to read this all today. I can take you through it separately. And Rebecca can take you through it separately, but you'll see some obvious things. Head count for the boys and girls, right? Essentially, we're saying 5 and 5, as I mentioned in the slides. Total number of adults, right, to cover their expenses. In many cases, our adults pay their own way, so that ends up not costing as much as we thought, and that ends up being a surplus, which is always great. But we can't assume that every adult is going to pay their own way. So we might have a balance from a prior year. This is a particularly good year where we had $750 left over. We also had some camper chips, we call camper chips left over. We allocate some of the budget for camper chips, typically 4, roughly $200 each, to help ensure that no scout is left behind and every scout can go to Camp Gorton or at least get a subsidy for Camp Gorton. In this case, we had $100 left over. We didn't consume all of that money. We have the profits from and expenses from summer fundraisers. We have our profits and expenses from popcorn. We have our pasta dinner. I mentioned we had other fundraisers, a chicken barbecue, chicken and biscuit pasta dinner budgeted. We sometimes get donations. We don't actually count on them, but we certainly put them into the spreadsheet if they come in. We record what our registration fees are for single scouts and for multi-scout families. And I believe that they have been adjusted up to $100 this year. Okay. We then have a section that shows how much each one of our trips are going to cost. We typically list the trips. It doesn't matter at all. Yep.
Peter, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Someone popped in on the chat and said that they're not seeing the new spreadsheets.
Oh, okay.
We still see the performance 2021 sheet.
Oh, okay, let me share the right spreadsheet. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's not good. Let's see here. Share the screen. I think I can just share my whole screen here. See if that works. Can you see it now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Perfect. Sorry about that, folks. So yeah, I've got the head count for the boys, the girls, the adults. I've got any annual transfer from our reserve from a previous year. We had $750 left over. We had some money left over from prior year's camper chips. We had fundraising income. We had popcorn sales, and we had sales from other fundraisers. So this is essentially the green part of the spreadsheet. It shows lots of income. Of course, some of these events have expenses. If you're doing a pasta dinner, you don't just sell the pasta dinner. You also have to pay for the pasta and the sauce. So, of course, the expenses go in the right-hand column. Okay. We then have a section that talks about our camps and trips. We list the camps and trips. Typically, it's 10 or 11 trips in an ambitious year. It doesn't matter at all if you change your trip name or if you change your trip. What matters here is that you've planned a trip in a given month. We color code them depending on whether they're going to be zero cost, some cost, or a high cost. And you can see here the per scout cost for Finger Lakes Trail Day and the Webelos Camp Out at Camp Gorton was $0. But Bristol Mountain Aerial Adventures actually did cost $20. The Swain ski trip cost $60. We're also planning to go horseback riding this year for $60. So, you get a sense that there's a mix here of zero cost, modest cost, very low cost, and some high cost activities. We keep a tally of how many we expect to attend, how much the scouts will pay, what the actual costs are, the real costs, what the payment by the attendees will be, and of course, we balance that out. And as you can see here, camping activities are one of the largest expenses that we have, 7,500 in a given year, with only 4,700 actually coming in. We include our recharter costs. Of course, we have to. We include some equipment costs for example, repairing or replacing tents, patrol boxes, hooking vessels. We have insurance costs for the trailer that we maintain, repairs on the trailer, and we also, I'm not sure that we do this anymore, but we used to include Troopmaster, the Troopmaster software, which actually costs something. We don't use that anymore. That's basically our office supplies and software. So that's to pay for printing or photocopying at the office. We include something for training. We include something for subsidies for Scout Campership, as I already mentioned. We typically try to provide Camp Gorton subsidies for about 4 scouts. That normally ends up being more than enough, actually. And we also subsidize camp fees for some of our leaders, our adult leaders. Some of our adult leaders can't necessarily afford to pay for camp themselves. We budget for ceremonies, uniforms, and essentially what happens is we add up the income, we add up the expenses, and we look for the difference. And because this is an exercise, the variance is 0, obviously, what I've shown you. But now I can provide this to you. I can provide this to you, and we can provide some training. We could even go through a sort of a Q&A, like a questionnaire to help you set up a troop budget. But make no mistake, as long as you have someone that can handle an Excel spreadsheet and someone that can handle basic ledgers, meaning income, expenses, and add up totals, you can handle this. If you don't have this, I would worry that you can't be held accountable. You can't show transparency. And it's very difficult to plan you a year if you don't have something like the spreadsheet. I'm going to show you 2 other spreadsheets very quickly. I'm not going to show these in detail, however. The first one is how we actually track, maintain our sales and our expenses for scouts. Okay, so you'll find that in each one of these cases, when a registration or a dues payment is due, we will figure out how much is left for the family to pay after they've met their popcorn target. This was actually in the year when we were asking for 600, we've increased that to 60%. We divide by 3. We essentially say what is left, what is due for registration and for scout activities. And essentially we'll figure out whether the balance is positive or negative. And that's normally when I make a phone call and say you either owe money or you don't owe money. That's typically the committee chair's job with the treasurer. But we have to maintain and maintain for each scout essentially a log of how much has been paid in each case. Okay. We also track popcorn sales for each scout. It's extremely important that we maintain that so that they're given credit and so that we maintain a running tally of how much popcorn's been sold in a given year. And then the last spreadsheet I want to show you is our monthly meeting report. I already mentioned having someone, a trustworthy treasurer that can report on a monthly basis is extremely important. If you miss a month, probably not a problem. If you miss 2, there may be problems. So you need to maintain and have somebody that can attend and put the hour or whatever it takes in each month to update the spreadsheet. There's obviously much more than an hour of background work required to collect checks for money coming in and to write checks for money going out. But someone needs to keep track of incoming funds, outgoing funds, expenses paid for outings, income from fundraisers in a given month. You've got here, for example, chicken, barbecue, rest stop, scout fundraisers, etc. Expected expenditures for Camp Gorton. Maybe we've written a check to secure a campsite. And of course, any other unanticipated expenses. And each month, we will then have a checking account balance, and you will expect that balance to exactly reflect the incoming and the outgoing expenses in a given month. Okay. We also maintain this on a monthly basis so that you can actually just copy and paste and create a month-by-month ledger to show how those numbers are changing. Can't emphasize enough the importance of maintaining this. And what Rebecca does for us is print out a copy of this, hands it out at each scout meeting, and it's over in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. Right? You've shown accountability, and you've shown that we're keeping track of the expenses. So I'll leave it there. I hope this was helpful to you. I know it's a lot to take on, but I'll also offer to you that if there's a troop, if you know of a troop that's struggling to create a budget, right, and they're going through a planning process and they're failing because of treasure issues, finance issues, we're here to help. This is once you've done it once and you get into a rhythm, it becomes second nature. And as long as you have someone that has basic Excel or spreadsheet skills, almost anyone can handle this. So I'll leave it open to questions if we have time for any quick questions, Carl.
Peter, yes, a couple of things I wanted to throw at you. Could you put your contact information in the chat so people know how to reach out to you to be able to get a hold of this presentation? And things that, correct me if I'm wrong, everything that you've talked about can be translated into a troop, a pack, or a venturing crew. Just change the word. And so for all the packs that are on here, please know that this is absolutely something that you could help out with or continue on with. I put in the chat the unit money earning application link. So anytime any of our units are doing a fundraiser, please make sure you complete that form and pass it on to your district professional. And my last question for you, and then we'll see where we go from there, is you had mentioned that you have $1,750 in ceremonies in your budget. And from what I've seen of a lot of units may not be putting that kind of money into ceremonies. Could you give us an example of what kind of ceremonies you put on for your unit?
So, for example, 3, sometimes 4 Eagle Courts of Honor. We actually allocate, I think it's somewhere around $200 or $300 per scout to support that. So now that's an option that we have made. I realize that in some cases you might decide that that's not affordable, or it's not something that you want the budget to carry as a burden. Because in principle, that means that all scouts and all scout families are contributing to the Eagle ceremony for scouts that actually come out of the troop. You might, for example, defer that and simply say, no, I think the scout family should carry it. Bear in mind, a scout family may not be able to afford a decent Eagle ceremony. And we feel as though celebrating as a group, right? Celebrating and enabling that celebration for the Eagle Scout is absolutely critical. So yeah, we do budget quite a lot for ceremonies. In addition to that, of course, it'll be the regular Court of Honors. So it'll be buying pizza, buying drinks, and stuff like that for Courts of Honor as you go through the year. But one thing I want to point out, Carl, is our numbers don't have to be your numbers, right? It's very important. These numbers can be changed, and they can be 0, and they can be higher. They can be anything that you want to be. What I love about the spreadsheet is you can do something called modeling. You can say, how many Courts of Honor can I afford? How much can I afford to spend at an Eagle ceremony? If I want to put $300 in for 4 Eagle Courts of Honor this year, what will that cost, and how much will that raise the popcorn target? With this spreadsheet, it is trivial for us to figure that out.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the group? If there's anyone that has a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question, and then we will continue on in a few moments. All right, anyone? Okay, with that, I want to thank Peter for this presentation. I think this was very helpful to a lot of people in getting their planning for the year going.